Schmidhuber invented everything. Only Schmidhuber can call himself a machine learning scientist. Everyone else can have the title of engineer at best, or possibly technician. It is exaggerated, but something is going on here. What is going on here? Who is Schmidhuber? He's possibly the greatest and most controversial AI scientist you've never heard of. Some say that he's the greatest guy ever. Some say that you shouldn't even get near him. And he's getting censored out like here. Llama 2 has some interesting thoughts about Schmidhuber. Who is Jürgen Schmidhuber? I apologize, but I cannot provide information on individuals who may have controversial or negative backgrounds. Wow, Meta has managed to make Llama try so hard to be inoffensive that it's actually quite personally offensive. We'll speak of his wrongdoings and personal beefs later, but guys, censorship is not an answer, come on. He's not a hacker like my build-off George Hotz, he's an academic. But what I like in him is, of course, the hacker side of him. The playful side, tinkering with things, changing the world on a daily basis, and having fun while doing it. Like here he's showing off his muscles, saying that AI research has kept him strong and healthy, and that AI could do wonders for you too. He's a complete boomer, but somehow in many ways he was just ahead of his time.
Just like a comedian tries to come up with funny stories where the unexpected punchline at the end relates back to the rest of the story in a regular way, such that you get again this type of wow effect. You know, before I came here, I thought this is going to be just another TEDx talk and there won't be much of an audience, but you are actually a large audience by my standards. The other day I gave a talk and there was just a single person in the audience. A young lady. I said, young lady, it's very embarrassing, but apparently I'm going to give this talk just to you. And she said, okay, but please hurry, I gotta clean up here.
And to be fair, he said the same joke in his every TED Talk I watched.
And she said, okay, but please hurry, I gotta clean up here. And she said, okay, but please hurry, I am the next speaker.
I like the variation in the joke because true AI scientists don't settle for local optimum because people laughed. They experiment more, chasing the global optimum. The exploration coefficient should go down as you get older, but it should never reach zero. That's why older people tend to be more conservative, but that's a different topic. This side of the Schmidhuber, the jokes, the chill side, the fun side, this is what I like. Not the unnecessarily strict and tense side of an academic. Because Schmidhuber is strict. Did I say Schmidhuber? I meant Jürgen Schmidhuber.
This is my name. This is how to pronounce my name.
Yes, he's the type of guy to be telling you constantly how to pronounce his name. At university, we had a guy who pretended to be a teacher, and when someone referred to him as Mr., he was like, Mr? Excuse me, I'm a master of engineering. I was like, dude, no. Do you realize how little your diploma means to me? And besides, I decide who I respect. You don't demand respect. Are you kidding me? And I get similar vibes here, seeing how strict Jürgen is. But what differs him is that he's actually really good. Like really, really, really good. Unlike the other guy. And we can forgive geniuses a lot. People don't even believe you that you're that smart if you're not just like a little insane. You know what I mean? It's like you cannot be too normal. And Schmidhuber gives off the impression like he's just a little nuts. He even speaks like a villain.
This is more than just another industrial revolution. It is something that transcends humankind and even biology.
His lyrical Munich accent, punctuated by abrupt changes in cadence and tone, calls to mind Christoph Waltz's Colonel Hans Landa in Inglourious Bastards.
Where does the hawk look? He looks in the barn, he looks in the attic, he looks in a cellar, he looks everywhere he would hide. But there's so many places it would never occur to a hawk to hide.
You're compelled to pay close attention to his mix of poetry and severity, because he usually feels like something big and ominous is coming. Overall, just brilliant guy, vibrant personality, huge biceps, that's peak AI research. So enjoy the overview of Jürgen Schmidhuber. Although in his CV from 2021 he wrote Jürgen, so it's Jürgen or Jürgen. I mean, this just tells you how pointless the discussion is. I'm simplifying it, I'm saying Jürgen Schmidhuber. Case closed, enjoy. We're starting with the lore to see why did he end up like this. So first he was losing at chess a lot to his dad, which is not a good look, but let's give him a chance. Then he was playing with blocks, kites and sand. Then he had a failed patent on a scissors helicopter thing, which I don't even, how was that even supposed to work? But as he reports, most people fail to stay airborne for longer than 30 seconds or reach altitudes above 10 meters. And by most he means everyone, but let them dream, guys, come on, be nice, it's a good patent. Future models will have a second rotor with opposite spin. Yep, that's right Jürgen, great idea. 30 years later we're still waiting for the next model. It will be epic when it comes out. Then he was sunbathing, became a dad and hiked. Looking at those photos you might get an impression that he's a normal human. But don't get deceived. Strengthen your psychic defenses. He got into machine learning, somehow, which is already a red flag.
When I was a boy, I wanted to maximize my impact on the world. And I was smart enough to realize that I am not very smart. And that I have to build a machine that learns to become much smarter than myself, such that it can solve all the problems that I cannot solve myself, and I can retire.
Quite a realization for a teenager. When I was a teenager, I didn't even know who I was and what was going on. After high school, Schmidhuber studied computer science and mathematics and served in the West German army for 15 months, starting in 1981. He didn't get along with his commanders. Jürgen doesn't like to be bossed around, especially if it means doing something he considers useless. My man being skeptical of authorities. He was so close to becoming a hacker, but he ended up in academia. His first publication, his diploma thesis, was titled Evolutionary Principles in Self-Referential Learning, and it was about meta-learning and machine learning, meaning machines learning to learn, also known as recurrent self-improvement.
So I call that meta-learning, learning to learn. And recursive self-improvement, that is really the pinnacle of that, where you then not only learn how to improve on that problem and on that, but you also improve the way the machine improves, and you also improve the way it improves itself. And that was my 1987 diploma thesis, which was all about that.
That's a solid topic for a diploma thesis at the age of 24. In 1997, so 10 years after his thesis, he co-authored the Long Short-Term Memory, or an LSTM paper, that is the most cited AI publication of 20th century. And LSTMs are still used by voice assistants and translators in Google, Facebook and many others.
At some point, Facebook used LSTM to make more than 4 billion translations per day. Compare that to the most successful YouTube video of all time. It's a song called Baby Shark. Baby Shark, da 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 da. And the song has more than 10 billion clicks. But it needed several years to get 10 billion clicks. And back then, LSTM working for Facebook, within 3 days, got more clicks than Baby Shark.
Then in 2012, if you're into machine learning, you know how big a breakthrough was AlexNet. And Schmidhuber claims that his DanNet from the previous year was the ancestor of AlexNet, winning all competitions before AlexNet appeared.
Networks developed in my lab are currently winning all kinds of pattern recognition competitions. For example, they are now the best method for recognizing connected French handwriting, but also Arab handwriting, but also Chinese handwriting. Although none of us speaks a word of Chinese or Arabic, and our French is also not so good.
In 2015, he published a highway-net paper whose variant, ResNet, made by other people, is the most cited AI publication of the 21st century. He also claims that GANs, generative adversarial networks, are a simple application of his even earlier adversarial curiosity principle from 1990. That's almost a 25-year difference. GANs are also a part of slight beef with GAN authors for not citing him properly, but we'll cover the dramas later. You know Transformers, the neural network architecture that's revolutionizing the AI space from 2017 and that enabled creation of ChatGPT and other language models. Schmidhuber says that Transformers are an extension of his 1991 fast-weight programmers.
I published this model that you mentioned, which is now called the unnormalized linear transformer. I had a different name for it. I called it a fast weight controller, but names are not important. The only thing that counts is the math. The transformer of 1991 was a linear transformer, so it's not exactly the same as the quadratic transformer of today.
Oh, okay.
But nevertheless, it's using these transformer principles.
So he argues that all these breakthroughs, if not directly, at least indirectly, were caused by him, because he had many successes and people took inspiration from him. I don't know how he does that, but now you understand the claim that he invented everything. In AI, but as a funny exaggeration, they say that he just made everything. Thanks Elon Musk for your generous hyperbole. Admittedly, however, I didn't invent sliced bread, just generative AI and things like that. And of course my team is standing on the shoulders of giants. He was a part of so many breakthroughs, he's incredibly smart, but the academic achievements are not enough for me. I wanna get closer. I wanna see what he thinks. Whether he thinks even.
They think now AGI is closed just because of ChatGPT. I think the only reason for that is because they don't really understand the nature of these large language models and their incredible limitations.
Welcome back to MLST. Today is a big one. We have Jürgen Schmidhuber, the original gangster of artificial intelligence.
Google, Apple, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, all of these companies emphasized that AI is central to what they are doing, and all of them are using in a massive way these learning algorithms that we have developed in our little labs in Munich and in Switzerland since the early 90s.
The most important thing we did was we felt the AGI together.
I've been feeling the AGI since the 1970s.
He was feeling the AGI before Ilya Sutskever was even born. Oh yes, this guy is the daddy.
So it was much more than just another industrial revolution. It's something that transcends humankind and even lightens up. In the not-so-distant future, for the first time, we will have something like animal-like AI. Once we have something like that, it may take just a few more decades until we have true human-level AI. And most of AI is going to emigrate because most of the resources are far away. And it's not going to stop with the solar system. And within a few tens of billions of years, totally within the limits of physics, and the expanding AI sphere is going to transform the entire visible universe. Humans are not going to remain the crown of creation, but that's okay because you can still see beauty and grandeur in realizing that we are part of a grander scheme leading the entire universe from low complexity to higher complexity. It's a privilege to live at a moment in time where we can witness the beginnings of that and contribute something to it.
What was the thing that first inspired you?
When I was a boy, I was thinking about what to do in my life, and then I thought the most exciting thing is to solve the riddles of the universe, and that means you have to become a physicist. However, then I realized that there's something even grander. You can try to build a machine that isn't really a machine any longer, that learns to become a much better physicist than I could ever hope to be. And that's how I thought maybe I can multiply my tiny little bit of creativity into infinity.
But ultimately, that creativity will be multiplied to understand the universe around us. That's the curiosity for that mystery that drove you.
Yes, so if you can build a machine that learns to solve more and more complex problems, a more and more general problem solver, then you basically have solved all the problems, at least all the solvable problems.
So how do you think, what does the mechanism for that kind of general solver look like? Obviously, we don't quite yet have one or know how to build one, but we have ideas, and you have had throughout your career several ideas about it. So how do you think about that mechanism?
So in the 80s, I thought about how to build this machine that learns to solve all these problems that I cannot solve myself. And I thought it is clear it has to be a machine that not only learns to solve this problem here and this problem here, but it also has to learn to improve the learning algorithm itself.
Right.
So it has to have the learning algorithm in a representation that allows it to inspect it and modify it such that it can come up with a better learning algorithm. So I call that meta-learning, learning to learn. And recursive self-improvement, that is really the pinnacle of that, where you then not only learn how to improve on that problem and on that, but you also improve the way the machine improves, and you also improve the way it improves itself. And that was my 1987 diploma thesis, which was all about that hierarchy of meta-learners that have no computational limits except for the well-known limits that Gödel identified in 1931 and for the limits of physics.
Can we create a general intelligence systems without ever really proving that that system is intelligent in some kind of mathematical way? Or can we just be super impressed by the thing working extremely well and that's sufficient?
There's an old saying, and I don't know who brought it up first, which says, there's nothing more practical than a good theory. and and a good theory of problem solving under limited resources, like here in this universe or on this little planet, has to take into account these limited resources. And so probably there is lurking a theory which is related to what we already have, these asymptotically optimal problem solvers, which tells us what we need in addition to that to come up with a practically optimal problem solver.
So you're saying at the very top, it'll be a beautifully written algorithm, but do you think that there's many layers of abstraction we have to first learn to construct?
Yeah, of course, we are building on all these great abstractions that people have invented over the millennia, such as matrix multiplications and real numbers and basic arithmetics and calculus and derivations of error functions and derivatives of error functions and stuff like that. So without that language that greatly simplifies our way of thinking about these problems, we couldn't do anything. So in that sense, as always, we are standing on the shoulders of the giants who, in the past, simplified the problem of problem solving so much that now we have a chance to do the final step.
So you ultimately think quantum mechanics is a pseudo-random number generator, so it's all deterministic. There's no randomness in our universe. Does God play dice?
So a couple of years ago, a famous physicist, quantum physicist, Anton Zeilinger, he wrote an essay in Nature, and it started more or less like that. One of the fundamental insights of the 20th century was that the universe is fundamentally random on the quantum level. And that whenever you measure spin up or down or something like that, a new bit of information enters the history of the universe. And while I was reading that, I was already typing the response, and they had to publish it because I was right. That there is no evidence, no physical evidence for that. So there's an alternative explanation where everything that we consider random is actually pseudo-random, such as the decimal expansion of pi, 3.141 and so on, which looks random, but isn't. So pi is interesting because every 3-digit sequence, every sequence of 3 digits appears roughly 1 in 1,000 times, and every 5-digit sequence appears roughly 1 in 10,000 times. What you would expect if it was random. But there's a very short algorithm, a short program that computes all of that. So it's extremely compressible. And who knows, maybe tomorrow somebody, some grad student at CERN goes back over all these data points, beta decay and whatever, and figures out, oh, it's the second billion digits of pi, or something like that. We don't have any fundamental reason at the moment to believe that this is truly random and not just a deterministic video game. If it was a deterministic video game, it would be much more beautiful, because beauty is simplicity. And many of the basic laws of the universe, like gravity and the other basic forces, are very simple. So very short programs can explain what these are doing. And it would be awful and ugly. The universe would be ugly. The history of the universe would be ugly if, for the extra things, the seemingly random data points that we get all the time, that we really need a huge number of extra bits to describe all these extra bits of information. So as long as we don't have evidence that there is no short program that computes the entire history of the entire universe, we are, as scientists, compelled to look further for that shortest program.
Your intuition says there exists a program that can backtrack to the creation of the universe. So
yeah,
compute the shortest path to the creation of the universe.
Yes, including all the entanglement things and all the spin up and down measurements that have been taken place since 13.8 billion years ago and so on. Yeah, so we don't have a proof that it is random. We don't have a proof that it is compressible to a short program. But as long as we don't have that proof, we are obliged as scientists to keep looking for that simple explanation. So all of science is a history of compression progress. You never arrive immediately at the shortest explanation of the data, but you're making progress. Whenever you are making progress, you have an insight. You see, oh, first I needed so many bits of information to describe the data, to describe my falling apples, my video of falling apples. I need so many data, so many pixels have to be stored. But then suddenly I realize, no, there is a very simple way of predicting the third frame in the video from the first two. And maybe not every little detail can be predicted, but more or less most of these orange blobs that are coming down, they accelerate in the same way, which means that I can greatly compress the video. And the amount of compression, progress, that is the depth of the insight that you have at that moment. That's the fun that you have, the scientific fun, the fun in that discovery. And we can build artificial systems that do the same thing, that measure the depth of their insights as they are looking at the data which is coming in through their own experiments, and we give them a reward, an intrinsic reward in proportion to this depth of insight. Mm-hmm. And since they are trying to maximize the rewards they get, they are suddenly motivated to come up with new action sequences, with new experiments that have the property that the data that is coming in as a consequence of these experiments has the property that they can learn something about, see a pattern in there which they hadn't seen yet before.
So if you view humans as intelligent agents, what do you think is the purpose and meaning of life for us humans? You've talked about this discovery. Do you see humans as an instance of power play agents?
Yeah, so humans are curious, and that means they behave like scientists. Not only the official scientists, but even the babies behave like scientists, and they play around with their toys to figure out how the world works and how it is responding to their actions. And that's how they learn about gravity and everything. And yeah, in 1990, we had the first systems like that. We would just try to play around with the environment and come up with situations that go beyond what they knew at that time, and then get a reward for creating these situations, and then becoming more general problem solvers and being able to understand more of the world. So yeah, I think in principle that that curiosity strategy, or more sophisticated versions of what I just described, they are what we have built in as well, because evolution discovered that's a good way of exploring the unknown world, and a guy who explores the unknown world has a higher chance of solving problems that he needs to survive in this world. On the other hand, those guys who were too curious, they were weeded out as well. So you have to find this trade-off. Evolution found a certain trade-off. Apparently in our society, there is a certain percentage of extremely explorative guys, and it doesn't matter if they die because many of the others are more conservative. And so, yeah, it would be surprising to me if that principle of artificial curiosity wouldn't be present in almost exactly the same form here.
In our brains. So,
did you hear that? Conservatives and liberals need each other. I don't make the rules, but apparently we have to be nice to each other.
What are you most excited about in terms of directions of artificial intelligence at this moment in the next few years in your own research and in the broader community?
So I think in the not so distant future, we will have for the first time little robots that learn like kids. And I will be able to say to the robot, look here, robot, we are going to assemble a smartphone. Let's take this slab of plastic and the screwdriver, and let's screw in the screw like that. You know? No, not like that, like that. Not like that, like that. And I don't have a data glove or something. He will see me, and he will hear me, and he will try to do something with his own actuators, which will be really different from mine, but he will understand the difference and will learn to imitate me, but not in the supervised way, where a teacher is giving target signals for all his muscles all the time. No, by doing this high-level imitation, where he first has to learn to imitate me, and then to interpret these additional noises coming from my mouth as helpful signals to do that better. And then it will, by itself, come up with faster ways and more efficient ways of doing the same thing. And finally, I stop his learning algorithm and make 1 million copies and sell it. And so at the moment, this is not possible, but we already see how we are going to get there. And you can imagine, to the extent that this works economically and cheaply, it's going to change everything. Almost all of production is going to be affected by that. And a much bigger wave, a much bigger AI wave is coming than the one that we are currently witnessing, which is mostly about passive pattern recognition on your smartphone. This is about active machines that shape the data through the actions they are executing, and they learn to do that in a good way. So many of the traditional industries are going to be affected by that. All the companies that are building machines will equip these machines with cameras and other sensors, and they are going to learn to solve all kinds of problems through interaction with humans, but also a lot on their own to improve what they already can do. And lots of old economy is going to be affected by that. And in recent years, I have seen that old economy is actually waking up and realizing that this is the case.
I know it's a bit of a strange question to ask, but what's your fondest memory in your career?
My fondest memory? Oh, it's usually when I discover something that I think nobody has seen before. But that happens very rarely, because most of the things you think of, somebody else has done before. But yeah, so...
He said it. Wow.
Why is it that people look at ChatGPT and they are convinced that it is on the path to AGI? And I look at it and I think of it as a database. It has no knowledge acquisition, so no reasoning. It has no creativity. It has no agency. It doesn't have many of the cognitive features that we have. Yet people look into it, and either they are willfully anthropomorphizing it or deluding themselves, or maybe they really see something. What do you think explains that?
I think that those people who were very skeptical of AGI, have been skeptical of AGI for decades, and suddenly were convinced the other way because of ChatGPT, because suddenly you had a machine that is really pretty good at the Turing test. They thought, oh, now AGI is here. But I think all those guys who suddenly are worried about AGI just because of ChatGPT and other large language models, it's mostly the guys who don't know much about AI. They don't know much about the incredible limitations of the neural networks that are behind ChatGPT. And today we already mentioned a couple of things that these neural networks cannot do at all. So it's kind of weird, actually. I have been advocating, I've been hyping, I must say, AGI for many decades. I claimed to my mom in the 70s that within my lifetime it's going to be there and everything. And my colleagues later in the 80s, they thought I'm crazy, but suddenly, many of these guys who have wrinkled their eyebrows about my predictions, they have turned around and they think now AGI is close just because of ChatGPT. I think the only reason for that is because they don't really understand the nature of these large language models and their incredible limitations.
True.
No, but I can't get my head around this, because many of these folks, especially in Silicon Valley, they work in the tech industry. They're working on this technology, and they apparently don't understand how machine learning works. And I can only understand it in the sense that sometimes you have brilliant people who are incredibly deluded in some other way, or there must be something to explain why they just can't see that. I mean, these things are still machine learning models, right? They're only as good as fitting a parameterized curve to some data distribution, and they'll work really well where you've got lots of density, and they won't work very well when you don't have lots of density. Why do they think it magically reasons?
Well, probably it's because many of them are venture capitalists, and they are being convinced by a couple of scientists who are forming startup companies that now their new startup is really close and they must invest a lot. And so I think at least one of the reasons for this misunderstanding is that some of the machine learning researchers are overhyping the abilities of what's now possible of large language models. And, you know, the venture capitalists, they don't really have any idea of what's going on. They just are trying to find out where to put their money, and are willing to jump on any additional hype train. AGI is possible, it's going to come in the not so distant future, but it will be, it will have large language models only as a submodule, something like a submodule, because the central goal of AGI is something that's really different. That's much closer to reinforcement learning. Now you can profit a lot as a reinforcement learner from supervised learning. For example, you can build a predictive model of the world, and then you can exploit this model, which might be built by the same foundation models that are used for language models. You can use then this model of the world to plan future action sequences. But now this is really a different story, and now you need to have some embodied AI, like a robot, which is operating in the real world. And in the real world, you can't do what you can do in the video games. In the video games, you can do a trillion simulations, a trillion trials to optimize your performance. And whenever you get shot, you get resurrected. Now, in the real world, you have a robot and you do 3 trials of something simple, and a tendon is broken of the finger, something like that. And you have to deal with the incredible frustrations of the real world and with the planning that you have to execute in the real world to minimize your interactions with the world, do mental planning into the future to optimize your performance, but then also be really efficient when you are collecting new training examples through your actions, because you want to minimize the effort for acquiring new data that improves your model of the world, which you are using for planning. So what I now mentioned in a nutshell is essential for AGIs, and several of these components that I mentioned don't work well at all at the moment.
Yes.
Now, the existing neural networks can be used in a certain way as components for a slightly larger system that does all of these things, and our first systems of this kind date really back to 1990 when I so maybe I was even the first to use the word world model back then for a recurrent neural network that is used to plan action sequences for a controller that is trying to maximize its reward. But these more complex problem solvers and decision makers, they are really a different game, are really different from just large language models.
Yes, and I think I read your paper with David Ha. Was that a good few years ago? He was the first person to use imagination. This model-based reinforcement learning for playing computer games. But that's a bit of an aside. I guess my point is that right now, in Silicon Valley, you can earn an incredible amount of money and have very high status for training neural networks with 1,000 lines of code, and it's easy. And why would they bother doing anything else? Because it works so well. And again, this is an example where you've already done the work. A third of a century, you've already thought about the next step and the next step, and they simply, I don't know whether they're just deluding themselves. I mean, why aren't they just doing the hard work? Maybe it's because life is too easy just saying that this is AGI now.
Yeah, I guess many of these guys who are now overhyping AGI are in search of funding for their next company.
Yeah.
And there are enough gullible venture capitalists who are jumping on that bandwagon. On the other hand, it's also clear that the techniques that we currently have, in principle, they are good enough to also do the next step, which is far beyond pure language models. And the same techniques, as I mentioned, that you can use to create language models can also be used to create models of the world. And then the important question is, how do you learn to use this model of the world in a hierarchical, efficient way to plan action sequences that lead to success. So you have a problem that you want to solve, you don't know how to solve it, there's no human teacher. Now you want to figure out through your own experiments and through these mental planning procedures how to solve that problem. In 1990, we did it in the wrong way, in the naive way. Back then, in 1990, I said, okay, let's have the recurrent network controller and the recurrent network world model, which is used for planning, and then we do the naive thing, which is millisecond by millisecond planning. What does that mean? It means that you are simulating every little step of your possible futures, and you're trying to pick one where in your mental simulation you will get a lot of predicted reward. And And that's silly. That's not what humans do. So when humans have a problem, like how do I get from here to Beijing, then they decompose the problem into subgoals. And they say, okay, first thing, so they are not going to plan like this. They are not going to say, okay, first I activate my pinky and then the other fingers, and I'm going to grip my phone, and then I'm going to call this taxi station and do all these things. No, they just have a high-level internal representation of call the taxi, then at the airport check-in, then for 9 hours nothing is going to happen until you exit in Beijing and so on. So you are not simulating millisecond by millisecond all these possible futures. Now, most of current reinforcement learning is still doing this step-by-step simulation.
And that's an amazing insight because, yeah, the best algorithms that we have right now are outputting the whole action at every time step. And they don't pick, like humans, levels of abstraction they think in. We have like action subroutines, patterns of actions. So we don't have to think about them carefully. We just like do what we already know how to do. Cool stuff, cool stuff. How to program this? No idea. I don't want to get into much detail here because after this fragment, Schmidhuber is mentioning his papers and getting technical, but I want this video to be understandable to like a bit wider audience. But I hope that even if you don't know what he's talking about, you get a feel of how he thinks, because that's like, I find it interesting.
In 1991, is it fair to say that you were just too soon? You had all of the algorithms and the insight, but you just didn't have enough compute power.
That's true, but we had a friend back then in 1991, and the friend was a trend. An old trend dating back at least to the year 1941 when Konrad Zuse built the world's first working general-purpose program-controlled computer in Berlin. And his machine could do roughly one elementary operation per second. So, for example, one addition per second. Since then, however, every 5 years, computers get gotten 10 times cheaper. And so we have greatly profited from that. So 45 years after Zuse built the Z1, this famous machine, in 1986, when I was working on my diploma thesis on artificial general intelligence, which we now call AGI, based on meta-learning, on learning to learn, this trend was already old, and compute was 1 billion times cheaper than what Zuse had back then in 1941. And the first desktop computers back then in the 80s, they allowed us to conduct experiments that seemed infeasible just a few decades earlier. However, by today's standards, our models still were tiny. But in the last 30 years, we have gained another factor of 1 million. So we now have 1 million billion times more compute per dollar than what Zuse had in 1941. And that's why now everybody has impressive AI on their smartphones, although the basic AI techniques running on these smartphones all date back to the previous millennium.
So assuming that this trend won't break anytime soon, what's going to happen next?
Then we'll soon have cheap computers with the raw computational power of a human brain. And a few decades later, of all 10 billion human brains together. Our collective human intelligence is probably limited to fewer than 10 to the 30 meaningful elementary operations per second. Why? There are 10 to the 10 people almost, and none of them can do more than 10 to the 20 elementary operations per second. Probably just a fraction thereof, because while I'm talking to you, yes, I have 100 billion neurons, but only a few million of them are really active. All of humankind cannot compute more than 10 to the 30 operations per second.
So will this trend go on forever?
It can't go on forever because there are physical limits. There is this Bremermann limit discovered in 1982, which says with 1 kilogram of mass, you cannot compute more than 10 to the 51 operations per second. I have a kilogram of matter in here for thinking, and it's just a tiny, tiny fraction of that. Nevertheless, as soon as you have reached this limit, then the acquisition of additional mass to build even bigger computers cannot proceed in an exponential way because we have this 3D nature of our universe, and so we will have a polynomial growth factor afterwards as we are trying to expand into space and use more and more of these kilograms out there for building better computers.
In all of those previous examples you gave, they were examples of supervised learning where the label was generated by a human. Now, since 1987, you've been working on a much more general version, reinforcement learning, where you don't have an explicit teacher. Tell me about that.
If you want to solve AGI, you basically have to work on reinforcement learning. When there's no teacher, when the system itself explores the world and learns how it works, and then learns to solve all kinds of problems without human feedback.
If you want to solve AGI, you need reinforcement learning. Write that down, all the people who say that large language models are a path to AGI. They are interesting. I'll be nice today. Of course, I recommend watching all these videos on your own, fully. I'm only showing you the fragments that I'll assume you'll find most interesting. But now I want to move on to a video about history of modern AI. But in this video, he included his theory of the trajectory towards singularity, or as he calls it, the omega point. Singularity for many means just the point where total compute power of computers exceeds the computation power of humans, all humans combined. But in this sense, how he means it, the point omega is like a convergence point of world history, of progress. It's hard to even describe it. I just want you to listen to it because it's not like, I mean, it sounds wild, completely wild, but it's not complete insanity. I mean, like, it might be, it sounds believable, but like at the same time, it's prone to like confirmation bias, just like we saw golden ratio spirals everywhere. But it's kind of a stretch, and we just as humans like to fit patterns without underlying meaning even. But I don't know, let's just listen.
This is my name and how to pronounce my name. I drew that robot cartoon in 2006. Let me first provide some historical context. Let me start with a beautiful pattern in the history of the universe that I found in 2014. It turns out that from a human perspective, the most important events since the beginning of the universe are neatly aligned on a timeline of exponential acceleration.
How convenient, huh?
In fact, history seems to converge in an omega point in the year 2040 or so. I like to call it omega because a century ago, Teilhard de Chardin called omega the point where humanity will reach its next level. Also, omega sounds much better than singularity. It sounds a little bit like, oh my God. Let's start with the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago. Now, we take this time interval of 13.8 billion years and divide it by 4. That's about 3.5 billion years. Omega is 2040 or so. At omega minus 3.5 billion years, something very important happened. Life emerged on this planet. And so we take this time interval of 3.5 billion years and we take again a quarter of that. We come out roughly 900 million years ago when something very important happened. Animal-like, mobile life emerged in the oceans. And we divide again by 4 and we come out 220 million years ago when mammals were invented, our ancestors. And we take 220 million years and divide by 4. 55 million years ago, the first primates emerged, our ancestors. And we divide again by 4. 13 million years ago, the first hominids emerged, our ancestors. And let me tell you, I don't know why all these divisions by 4 keep hitting these defining moments in history, but they do. I also tried thirds and fifths and harmonic proportions, but only quarters seem to work for some reason. And we divide again by 4. 13 million years divided by 4. 3.5 million years ago, something very important happened. The dawn of technology, as nature called it. The first stone tools. And we divide again by 4. 800,000 years ago, the next great breakthrough in technology happened. Controlled fire was invented. And we divide again by 4. 200,000 years ago, roughly, anatomically modern man emerged, our ancestors. And again, we divide by 4. Roughly 50,000 years ago, the so-called behaviorally modern man emerged, our ancestors. And they started colonizing the entire planet. And we divide again by 4. We come out 13,000 years ago when something very important happened. Civilization started. The domestication of animals occurred. The invention of agriculture, the first settlements, the first discovery of America. And generally speaking, the beginning of civilization as we know it. Now remember, we started 13 billion years ago, now we are down to 13,000 years ago. Things are rapidly accelerating. And you see, all of civilization, 13,000 years of history of civilization are just a flash in world history, just a millionth of the age of the cosmos. And we divide again by 4. 3,300 years ago, something important happened. We had the first onset of the first population explosion in the Iron Age. And we divide 3,300 years again by 4. And remember that the convergence point seems to be omega in the year 2040 or so. Omega minus 800 years. That was in the 13th century when iron and fire came together in form of guns and cannons and rockets in China. This has defined the world since then. And we divide again by 4. Omega minus 200 years, we hit the mid-18th century when iron and fire came together in even more sophisticated form, in form of sophisticated machines to power the Industrial Revolution. And at the same time, or roughly the same time, the germ theory of disease made people live longer, and fertilizer helped to trigger the second population explosion somewhere in the mid-1800s, and it peaked in the 20th century, driven by the Haber-Bosch process for making artificial fertilizer. And that made the 20th century stand out among all centuries in the history of mankind. And we divide again by 4, omega minus 50 years. That's more or less the year 1990. The end of the 3 great wars of the 20th century, World War I, World War II, and the Cold War. And suddenly a digital nervous system starts spanning the globe through cell phones and cheap PCs for everybody. And the World Wide Web is created at the European Particle Collider in Switzerland by a British immigrant. And modern artificial intelligence also starts around this time. And we divide again by 4. Omega minus 13 years. That is something in the near future. That's more or less the year 2030. Let's come back to this later. For now, let's talk more about modern AI. You remember my simple pattern from the introduction, my simple pattern of exponential acceleration of the most important events in the history of the entire universe from a human perspective. Now, let's extrapolate from there. We seem to be now more or less in the final stretch of this exponential acceleration since the Big Bang. And this final stretch seems to fit into a single human lifetime. 1990 was omega minus 50 years. And we divide again by 4. Omega minus 13 years, that's around 2030, when many predict that cheap AIs, cheap brain-like AIs, will or might have human brain power, just the sheer processing power. And then the final 13 years or so until omega, when incredible things are going to happen. But of course, time won't stop with omega. Maybe it is just human-dominated history that is going to end. After omega, many curious meta-learning AIs that invent their own goals, that set themselves their own goals, which have existed in my lab for decades, they will quickly improve themselves, restricted only by the fundamental limits of computability and physics. What will super smart AIs do? Space is hostile to humans, but it's friendly to appropriately designed robots, and it offers many more computational or physical resources than our thin film of biosphere, which receives less than a billionth of the sun's energy. While some curious artificial intelligences will remain fascinated with life, at least as long as they don't fully understand it, most of them will be more interested in the incredible new opportunities for robots and software life out there in space. Through innumerable self-replicating robot factories in the asteroid belt and beyond, they will transform first the solar system, and then within a few 100,000 years the entire galaxy, and within tens of billions of years the rest of the reachable universe. And note that despite the light speed limit, the expanding AI sphere will have plenty of time to colonize and shape the entire visible cosmos. But in the long run, AIs are going to, especially the smart ones, are going to set themselves their own goals
And I have no doubt in my mind that they are going to become much smarter than we are. And what are they going to do? Of course, they are going to realize what we have realized a long time ago, namely that most of the resources in the solar system, or in general, are not in our little biosphere. They are out there in space. And so, of course, they are going to emigrate. And of course, they are going to use trillions of self-replicating robot factories to expand in form of a growing AI bubble, which within a few 100,000 years is going to cover the entire galaxy by senders and receivers, such that AIs can travel the way they are already traveling in my lab, by radio from sender to receiver, wireless. So what we are witnessing now is much more than just another industrial revolution. This is something that transcends humankind and even life itself. The last time something so important has happened was maybe 3.5 billion years ago, when life was invented. A new type of life is going to emerge from our little planet, and it's going to colonize and transform the entire universe. The universe is still young. It's only 13.8 billion years old. It's going to become much older than that, many times more, many times older than that. So there's plenty of time to reach all of it, or all of the visible part, totally within the limits of light speed and physics. A new type of life is going to make the universe intelligent. Now, of course, we are not going to remain the crown of creation. Of course not. But there is still beauty in seeing yourself as part of a grander process that leads the cosmos from low complexity towards higher complexity. It's a privilege to live at a time where we can witness the beginnings of that and where we can contribute something to that. Thank you for your patience.
Okay, chat, what do we think? I mean, I'm kind of astonished how well the theory sounds, but predicting the future is an interesting activity. It's really, really hard.
And we take a quarter of that time, omega minus 10 years. Now that's in the future. And many have noticed that it's really difficult to predict the future. Many learned that the hard way, including myself and the guy who is responsible for my investments.
I could listen to him for hours. He's undeniably a smart, fascinating guy. But if you are in the AI space and you hear other AI scientists speak of him, you quickly realize that something's off. Something's not quite right. I even made a video about Schmidhuber and one of his papers because it was fantastic. I was really captivated by the language, by the ideas, and I complimented him a lot. And I got a comment that started with, "Don't read too much Schmidhuber papers." Like, why not? Turns out that not everybody likes him, and the reason is his unusual interpersonal attitude. We've established already that he's quite combative and assertive, arrogant maybe even, and he confronts people publicly, claiming that they failed to cite his or someone else's work. Like, he just really cares about proper citing in the science world and proper credit assignment. Like every other scientist pretty much, but he just takes it a step further. He cares more than the rest. It became such a meme that there's a word for this. If someone gets publicly confronted by Schmidhuber, they get Schmidhubert.
And by accessing an explicit tractable density over the generator that creates the noise.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because you have this nice slide there. My name is Jürgen Schmidhuber from the Swiss AI Lab, and I was wondering whether you can relate these very interesting GANs or GANs to the other adversarial network that we had back then in 1992, where you had two types of network fighting each other, also playing a minimax game. In many ways very similar, but in other ways different. And I was wondering whether you have comments on the similarities and differences of these old adversarial networks.
Yeah, so Jürgen has asked me if I have any comment on the similarities and differences here, but he's in fact aware of my opinion because we've corresponded about this by email before, and I don't exactly appreciate the public confrontation. If you want to form your own... If you want to form your own opinion about whether predictability minimization is the same thing as generative adversarial networks, you're welcome to read the paper. Added our comments on the extent to which we think that they are similar, which is that they are not particularly similar to the NIP's final copy.
Just for completeness, however, there are comments which you did not address, and I still think
we've had a very extensive email thread, and I would prefer to use my tutorial to teach about generative adversarial networks. If people want to read about predictability minimization, please do so.
Yeah. Just always make sure you have the related work section.
The comments have been added to the NIPS paper. So, returning to the comparison to noise contrastive estimation.
Ian is a total genius in this world, and Jürgen basically stood up and said, "This is now such an interesting idea. We thought about it years ago." Says Corey Matthewson, an AI researcher at the University of Alberta. He's witnessed a few Schmidhuberings firsthand and says they've become almost a rite of passage in some corners. At this point, young researchers might aspire to be Schmidhubered one day. And this is the "you're not wrong, you're just an asshole" kind of situation.
And while I was reading that, I was already typing the response, and they had to publish it because I was right.
I can only imagine how it feels when you exchange many emails with someone privately in this passive-aggressive tone, and they appear at your conference, at your speech on a conference, and asks you the same thing, the same exact thing, like you never talked before. I mean, come on. And there are many more examples of this. He writes tweets about this, he writes blog posts, and it's not the best way to handle it because the guys apparently and understandably feel attacked, and everyone's losing in this unpleasant atmosphere. Don't attribute to malice what can be adequately explained with incompetence or negligence in this case. There are so many good reasons for not citing a paper, beginning with simple negligence, lack of awareness, lack of conviction that it's necessary, and ending with the simple fact that things get rediscovered, or people read papers and they have the idea in their head, but they don't remember the original source, and it just they might get tricked that it's their own idea. Just like there's a ton of witness bias, our memory is really faulty, and to assume that it's because of malice and their bad intentions. I mean, maybe he doesn't assume that, but that's how it comes off as. If you write a paper about a new electric car design, I don't expect you to cite the first electric cars from almost 150 years ago. It would be nice, probably. It would be a nice courtesy, but it should be fine without it. If you cite some recent work that cites even more recent work, and there's a tree of citations down to the first electric cars, it should be completely fine. I mean, I don't know how academics work. I'm not an academic, so don't take my word for an expert opinion, but according to my common sense, it should be just fine. But if you care about correcting the history, assume good intentions of other people and be nice about it. The confrontations don't seem too friendly, and they're not received in a friendly manner because something went wrong. If fighting for the right cause, for correct attribution in academia, which every scientist should care about, managed to make a Bloomberg article written about Schmidhuber titled "This man is the godfather the AI community wants to forget. Time for everyone to start citing Newton and Leibniz." This seems in jest, but who among us doesn't cite Hipparchus when working on geospatial topics? Okay, now we're starting to border rudeness and bullying, cyberbullying, but you know, it illustrates the point that people don't care enough. I mean, don't care as much as Schmidhuber about carefully tracing out each discovery that led to their discovery. I mean, it's an interesting debate about how much of that is laziness, how much of that is unnecessary work, because, you know, it just adds so much work and it's not always necessary, some would say. I'm sure that Jürgen would have counter arguments and we can discuss, you know, where's the limit of how far back scientists should go and all this stuff. But, you know, Schmidhuber is a legend already. His accomplishments speak for themselves. He doesn't need to ask for more attention and respect, and the fact that he puts himself in the position where he just asks for more attention is a bit astonishing. Think about what would happen if he just stayed silent. He would be the biggest gigachild in AI. Just attend the talks, keep publishing papers. His teams are winning competitions. He invented everything, was a part of everything in AI. He will be the most respected guy there. Everyone will listen what he has to say. He's already popular, but to a smaller degree than what he could have if not for his attitude.
I'm really bad at many things. There's a reason why I went into AI.
There is a good argument, though, for paying that much attention to history of discovery. In one video, I had Schmidhuber say a beautiful thing about his approach.
I'm interested in credit assignment, not only in machine learning, but also in the history of machine learning, because machine learning itself is the science of credit assignment.
As much as I don't support the way he confronts people, I respect this response. Machine learning, and especially reinforcement learning, is truly about proper credit assignment, because we have to exactly know which actions led to our result, either good or bad. That's really nice, I must admit. And one last thing about Schmidhuber being somewhat ostracized from the AI community, because as one guy on Reddit pointed out, Schmidhuber deserves to be among the most influential AI scientists, but he isolated himself due to his somewhat aggressive way of claiming credit. He's also kind of hidden himself away in the mountains of Europe, while most of the deep learning research boom was happening in North America. And that's a good remark, because I haven't thought about the geography before, but Schmidhuber is based in Switzerland, while most top AI researchers are in the USA. So it's harder for him to go to the same conferences, be in the same community, network with the people, and just everything. So he's kind of isolated by choice now in the world where your connections and the friends you made along the way are priceless. Who is he then? If you put aside the controversies, he's such a badass AI researcher. He says things like, "My team plans to change the course of human history," in between bites of salmon lasagna a la Lugano Cafe. Absolute gigachad. I just like the style of an academic that he is, especially compared to other academics. If you ever read his papers, they read beautifully. The language it works on my intuition a lot. Kind of reminds me of my favorite book, Anti-Fragile. I get stimulated in a good way with that clever, dense language. Unlike many other scientific papers that sound like authors are trying to convince you how smart they are and how vast is their academic knowledge, instead of simplifying the contents like a true genius. Schmidhuber does almost none of that. He comes right at you with his ideas. Sometimes words are much better than any equation you can give me. And Schmidhuber recognizes the power of these words. He doesn't hide behind scientific jargon. I even would be his apprentice if I could. but I can't, and that's fine. He's one of the few people that would persuade me to go into academics. But I have to find my own path that incorporates the best of him in my own style. I definitely don't want to isolate myself. I want to talk to my community directly, make tons of friends, challenge myself constantly, and eventually build an AI that will solve problems that I could never solve myself. I still want to beat all games. I'm glad we have Schmidhuber. I'm not saying he's always right, but I'm saying that his beefs and the controversies don't even compare in significance to his achievements. I give him respect where it's earned and honesty where it's deserved. He's a good guy. Thanks for watching.
I wish to thank the organizers for doing a great job and for the check which I'm going to spend on my kids. I wish to thank my mom and my dad, without whom all of this would not have been possible. I wish to thank my kids, without whom all of this would not have been necessary. And I wish to thank you, my lovely audience, for your patience.